Hi everyone, and welcome to this course in philosophy, an introductory course giving you all the greatest hits of the field of philosophy. The very first thing we're going to try to tackle is probably counterintuitive. You're not going to like this, but we're going to have to define what philosophy is in general. And I have a feeling that if you were to look inside of a dictionary, it would say something like this, right? So philosophy, noun, from the Greek philosophos, lover of knowledge or wisdom, right? So people usually think of philosophy as, the love of knowledge or the love of wisdom. And there is somewhat unhelpful descriptions of the field like this one, the study of the fundamental nature of knowledge, reality, and existence. To be honest, I feel like that doesn't really help you understand what philosophy really is. And so what I'm going to try to do in this video is, I guess I'm going to tell you that it's not quite the case that you can say philosophy is just one thing. Essentially, during different time periods, the methods of philosophy have shifted. The goals of philosophy have shifted. So in short, the point of philosophy and the way to do philosophy has just been changing across time. So it's hard to define one philosophy in one singular way. So let's begin here by just kind of giving you a feel of the many coats that philosophy has worn throughout the centuries and millennia, really. So take it here from the slides. During Greece's classical period, philosophy was conceived of in different ways. There were lifestyle schools of philosophy, like the Stoics, more conventional schools like Plato's Academy, and even anti-schools like the Cynics. I will tell you more about those in a second. And yet they were all philosophers. It would be strange to say, well, that's not really philosophy to any one of these. Many people today are familiar with Stoicism. It's almost having a resurgence in popularity for many reasons, really. But the basic idea behind Stoicism was that you need to learn to control your emotional reactions. So this is a lifestyle philosophy. The whole goal was to reach tranquility, sort of a state of evenness of mind, right? So you have an inner peace, and that was the whole idea. And you had to train yourself to be, less reactive to, emotional events. And so that, of course, is philosophy. That was one very popular form of philosophy, in fact. Who we have here is Mr. Plato, which, by the way, fun fact, not his real name. Anywho, he opened what has, in effect, been called the first university in Western history. And that's very much like the sort of philosophy we do today, right? It's people talking and discussing certain ideas. And that feels very much like, academic work that all of us do nowadays here in colleges and universities. Those of us who work in colleges and universities. And then there's this guy right here. They called him the dog. His name was Diogenes. And he's sort of, we call him an anti-school philosopher sometimes. That's what I'm calling him, at least in this course. And what Diogenes basically did was he pointed out maybe the futility of some other forms of philosophy, in particular Plato. He would often disrupt Plato's lectures, apparently. And he would sort of try to lead by example. He would say, well, here's what philosophy is. It's this way. And he would, instead of writing about it too much, he would just kind of show what it is. And so there's a little bit of tearing down, and that's part of his shtick. But there's also a bit of lifestyle in there. So he tore down Plato and actually was an influence on the later Stoics. So that's anti-school. A little bit of tearing down, a little bit of leading by example. All of these are philosophers. So try to weave one definition around all of those. I dare you. Then came the Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages, some viewed the goals of philosophy and theology to be basically identical. while others believed in the doctrine of two truths, where each field was supposed to be pursuing truth separately. The first type of philosophy, where philosophy and theology are supposed to be going in the same direction, that's called scholasticism. And one person we'll look at very briefly in this course believed in that. And then the other view, the doctrine of two truths, that's basically the polar opposite, right? You just let theology go where it goes. You let philosophy go where it goes. Even if it goes in different directions, that's fine. And the person we have listed here, on the image here, Thomas Aquinas, well, he didn't believe any one of those. He actually said it shouldn't be the case that we make philosophy subservient to theology. It just is the case that if you do theology and you do philosophy, they'll take you to the same destination, right? To the same conclusions. So there are three different views right there in the Middle Ages. One of them says philosophy is in the service of theology. The other one says they actually go in two different directions, and that's fine. And the third view from Aquinas is, well, if you just do philosophy and you do theology, you're going to end up in the same place anyway. There you go. Try to weave one definition around all three of those. All right, let's jump ahead here. Some philosophers from the modern period, dating from the 17th to the 19th century, such as Descartes and Kant, believe that philosophy is an autonomous and, in some sense, unbounded field where fundamental truths could be sought out and discovered. What does that mean? Well, we're going to talk a lot about Descartes. By the way, his name is, he's French, so that's how you pronounce it, Descartes. And we're going to talk a lot about both these thinkers. And the main thing you want to think about right now, though, is this. They basically thought that philosophy could lead us to fundamental truth, right? It could be the foundation of the sciences. It's basically your first stop if you're trying to build an entire theory of everything. It should be philosophy where you begin. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. Actually, these will be the main people we'll be talking about in this course. But we'll talk a little bit more about that in about 2 lessons. And fast forwarding to today, some contemporary philosophers, such as Patricia Churchland, who's right here in this picture, see philosophy, notice the lowercase p, as continuous with the natural sciences, dealing with science's most abstract problems, a sort of theoretical wing to the sciences. What does all of that mean? It basically means these modern day philosophers, at least some of them, say, well, what we're really doing is we're talking about some aspect of the natural sciences. Basically, we're dealing with their more abstract problems. If you ever read a scientific paper and you notice the discussion section, or you notice at the very beginning they say, in this study we're going to talk about happiness, and here's what we mean by happiness. Well, that part, the defining what we mean, that just is a philosophical endeavor, and it's actually much more complicated than you think. I mean, try to do it for yourself. Try to define happiness. As we know in science, there's basically 2 steps. What are we talking about and how do we measure it? The what are we talking about part is harder than you think, and these philosophers say, well, that's where we can help. So there is Patricia Churchland, very influential when it comes to the philosophy of neuroscience. Okay, let me just give you a couple of other takes here. Some philosophers from the 20th century, notably the members of the Vienna Circle, believe that philosophy as a field is by and large done. Various sciences have been extracted from it throughout its history, and logic was the last scientific extraction. Almost all that's left now is pseudo-problems. So these are anti-philosophers, more anti-school people. They were around in the 20th century, and they were basically saying, we got to stop this. We're basically done. Logic was the last big thing that we pulled out of philosophy, and everything else is just not even worth talking about. So there is another school of philosophy, it's an anti-school. But again, they were philosophers, the ones who said all this. As a matter of fact, the view that philosophy is all pseudo-problems is a philosophical view. Try to wrap your mind around that one. I mean, how can we weave one definition for Descartes, Patricia Churchland, and these Vienna Circle philosophers who say that all philosophy is basically all nonsense now? It's not helpful anymore. It's just not possible. There just is no one definition that can weave together all of these things. As if, they are some philosophers who basically catch on to this. And here's what they basically say. They accept that philosophy is a field of inquiry with no standard methodology, a legacy department in universities that is still allowed to exist because of its past contributions and which allows for exploration of topics that aren't being covered by other disciplines. That is a nice, fancy way of saying that philosophy is just still around because it has been influential in the history of thought in general. And so, we kind of just let philosophers think about what they want to think about. And sometimes it's very helpful and sometimes it's not, but there is no standard methodology that unites these different thinkers. It's a department where they let you think about what you want to think about. All right. Well, I hope I've convinced you that there's no easy way to weave a definition around all these different approaches to philosophy. I will say this, though. There is a sense in which all philosophers essentially get really meta, basically instantly. I mean, it is the case that philosophy goes abstract as soon as possible. So they all have a little something in common. Maybe it's just not the case that philosophy is the only discipline that does this. Other disciplines can, of course, go meta. Philosophers just kind of live there. That's sort of where they like to hang out. Okay, well, what do we do in this course? How are we going to do an introduction to philosophy when philosophy maybe isn't a thing? That is a strange problem to have. Well, for all problems, there's a solution, I believe. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to just tell you a story. And in that story, I'm going to weave together many famous questions that have been historically conceived of as philosophical problems. In other words, we're going to just look at 10 big philosophical questions throughout history. And because they have been considered philosophical at least one point in their history, some philosophers have talked about it, right? So that's what we're going to focus on. 10 questions, my friends. In the coming weeks, you will come to grip with several dilemmas that have been extremely influential throughout the history of philosophy. Now, to be successful at this endeavor, well, we do have to learn some basic concepts in jargon in philosophy. And so let's begin with the notion of arguments. Now, arguments have a negative connotation. People think of arguments as heated, as emotional, as, breaking up friendships and all that. That's not the kind of argument we're talking about here. Essentially, you will not see these arguments at an IKEA showroom, a couple fighting over what color the curtains should be. Arguments in philosophy are supposed to be level-headed and, to a certain extent unemotional, but maybe a disciplined passion is a better way to put it. An argument is basically just a pile of sentences that are given in support of another sentence, which we call the conclusion. And these sentences that support the conclusion, they have a special name. They're called premises, right? So the singular is premise, the plural is premises. And of course, the conclusion is whatever sentence is being argued for. This is our currency. That's what we deal with in philosophy. Basically, every class, roughly, will just be an argument, a new argument or arguments to explore. So we have to get very, very familiar with these. So here's the basic anatomy of an argument then. And here's maybe the most told and boring example of an argument in history. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. That is an argument because these here premises are being given in support of this here conclusion. And the whole idea here is that if you believe 1 and 2, you have to believe 3. That's the trick to arguments. It's like the premises compel you to believe in the conclusion. That is the whole idea of an argument. Okay, some other concepts that we should wrap our minds around. Here's the first one, a logical consistency. 2 or more statements are logically consistent if it is possible that they are all true simultaneously. People mess this up quite frequently because the bar for logical consistency is not as high as you might think. Consistency just means, hey, these, let's just say it's 2 sentences, they can both be true at the same time. Not that they are true, but that they can be true. That's it. That's all it really is. So I have to literally, though, add this note just to make sure that you don't forget. Don't equate consistency with truth. Maybe on a quiz or a test, I'll say, hey, are these 2 statements consistent? So let me show you these right here. The present king of France is bald. Baldness is inherited from your mother's side of the family. Some people, when I present them with sets of sentences like this, they say to themselves, I ask them, hey, is it consistent? And they'll answer this question. They'll ask, are they true? But when I ask you, is it consistent? I'm never asking you, is it true? That would be to equate consistency and truth. What I'm asking you when I ask, hey, are these consistent? I'm asking you if they can be true at the same time. And so these 2 statements are both false. Here's why the first one is false. The present king of France is not bald. There is no king of France. So that's just not true. Baldness is inherited from your mother's side of the family. That was thought true for a long time, and I saw some recent evidence that says, hey, that's actually not entirely true either. So let's treat both of them as false. Okay, well, they're both false, but guess what? They're actually still both consistent. Just think about it. Can they both be true at the same time? Yeah, they can be. One doesn't directly contradict the other. That's all it means to be consistent. So later on in this course, when I say, well, is this view right here consistent with this view? All I'm asking is, can someone accept both of them at the same time? Can they both be true at the same time? In many cases, it'll turn out we can't, right? That'll be the way we object to certain views. That's inconsistent with this, and we know this thing is true, so the first statement must be false. So we'll do some of that as we go. But there is an important piece of jargon there, consistency. Okay, more terms. Fallacies. Fallacies, we can have a whole course on fallacies. In fact, our critical thinking course is in large part a course in argument theory where you just cover a bunch of fallacies. What is a fallacy? It's an error in reasoning. And they come in 2 flavors, formal and informal. Formal fallacies have to do with the structure of one's argument. We actually won't cover these too much in this class. If you take a course in symbolic logic, that is Philosophy 106 in the case of El Camino, you will do quite a bit of that, but that's not something we'll focus on. We will focus on a little bit informal fallacies. So these have to do with the relationship between the evidence, the premises, and the conclusion. I think the best way to really tell you what an informal fallacy is just to show you one, right? So let's do that now. And here's your informal fallacy of the day. Let's begin with argumentum ad hominem. Sometimes people just shorten the name of this fallacy to ad hominem. That's cool. This is a fallacy in which one attacks the arguer rather than the argument itself. So once you know what this is, you kind of see it all over the place. Let's assume that in step one, someone gives an argument and the person listening to the argument says, well, I don't like your argument. But instead of critiquing the argument itself, they attack the person instead. Now, I don't know what you're into or what kind of things you like to do, but I bet you in almost any domain of life, you can find some ad hominem arguments. This is just something that we might do as a knee-jerk reaction, right? We don't like something, we can't think of an objection, and so without even noticing, we start attacking the person instead of the argument. This happens a lot in politics. It's actually kind of fun, if not a little depressing, to watch some political debate and see some ad hominem arguments. Or if you really want to torture yourself, you jump online and you look at the comments in political videos. I'm going to read some of this, although I might bleep some of it. But here we go. The Bernie or bust people are the most annoying, cancerous people in the world. Just vote for Clinton and shut up. Well, that's not exactly an argument, but here's the response. No, condescending those people who think they can bully people into changing their votes are more annoying. You shut up. Well, this is not a very good argument. Basically, almost any way you look at it, no one is providing a very good argument here, but you can kind of see that if you were to even try to turn it into an argument, it wouldn't be a very good argument. So here's maybe what it would look like in standard form, right? In the numbered format that we'll be using in this course. Premise 1, you are annoying. Premise 2, you are cancerous. Conclusion, therefore you should vote for Clinton. That is not persuasive, right? So this is an ad hominem in that rather than giving people a reason for voting for candidate X, they're calling them names and saying, just shut up and vote for candidate X. That is very bad reasoning. That is not quite an argument. And if you were to try to make it into an argument, the best you can do is a fallacy like this one. All right. Well, my friends, that's some of the jargon that we'll be using. And before I wrap up this video, I do want to talk about one little thing here. By and large, in this class, we will be focusing on the Western tradition, right? The tradition that more or less began in Greece about 2,500 years ago, let's say. There's, a couple of reasons for this. There's, of course, wonderful things happening in India around the same time period, in China around the same time period, including what is probably a better claim to the beginning of science that was happening in China. But we're not going to talk about that. What we'll be focusing on is, again, the Western tradition, and there's a couple of reasons for this. So let me start with this one. Most of us, even if we're not originally from, Western European descent, we're just immersed in Western ideas. I just take it as for granted that if you're watching this video, you live somewhere in the U.S., and here in Southern California, where I live, you just have all kinds of Western ideas rattling around in your head. And so it's really interesting to kind of know the intellectual history of how those ideas got into your head. And so that's one reason why we should focus on this in this class. It just is the case that people in high school don't get to hear this intellectual history typically. And so when you make it to college, it's really nice to focus on that in particular. Here's another reason why we should focus on this tradition. Some Western ideas are actually really good, and it's nice to celebrate good ideas when they happen. They're so rare, might as well celebrate them a little bit. By the way, some Western ideas are quite bad. And breaking past this illusion, right? When you think a bad idea is good, that's a bad illusion to have. So breaking past these illusions, that's a form of progress, right? Letting go of some ideas that aren't very good. That should also be celebrated, right? Expose the bad ideas and bring them into the light and hopefully get rid of them. So that's something that we'll maybe do a little bit of in this class. And by the way, here's one final reason. It's just a great story. I will tell you as best I can little historical anecdotes along the way, and it really is interesting and engaging, and I hope you enjoy it. Okay, speaking of enjoying it, I did make a story for you, and guess what? It all ties around one central question, one central idea. Believe it or not, I'm tying the central story of this course around the notion of collapse. Right. Very depressing. Collapse. That's how we'll begin this story. Except we can't start today. We need a little bit more setup. But soon, my friends, we'll begin the story. And it's a story surrounded by bad things happening.